Hey guys, and welcome back to Texit RAIDER. I'm Jonathan, and this is Chapter 1. This is not a how-to guide, this is not financial advice, and this is not an attack. This is just some of my experiences and my journey in Texacoin. What you're about to hear is a first-hand account of what it was like to be an early participant in Texacoin, from the excitement of the beginning to the growth, the chaos, the friendships, the money, the mistakes, and the hard lessons that followed. This project exists because Texacoin isn't just one thing. Never was. There was an old Texacoin, and there is a new Texacoin. People argue past each other because they lived different versions of the same story. This is part 1 of a larger series, not to tell you what to think, but to show you what happened through the eyes of someone who was there early, stayed through the highs and lows, and chose transparency over chaos. Some of what you'll hear is uncomfortable, some of it is hopeful, all of it is honest. This isn't about hype, it's about history, perspective, and accountability. What comes next is not meant to convince you to join or to leave. It's meant to give you a more broad picture of what's going on. And I hate to do these, but here's a legal disclaimer. This content is for educational and informational purposes only. Nothing presented in this video or related material should be interpreted as financial advice, investment advice, legal advice, or a recommendation to buy, sell, or participate in any cryptocurrency token or mining project for that matter. All of these statements made are personal opinions and first-hand experiences based on my individual involvement. Any references to events, outcomes, behaviors, or patterns are shared from my perspective and are not presented as verified facts unless explicitly stated. I do not claim insider access, privileged information, or intent to accuse any individuals or organization of illegal activity. Viewers are encouraged to conduct their own independent research and consult qualified professionals before making any financial decisions. Past performance does not guarantee future results. Cryptocurrency involves substantial risk, including the potential loss of all invested funds. By viewing this content, you acknowledge that you understand these risks and accept full responsibility for your own decisions. Now, my first encounter with Texacoin didn't happen online. It didn't come from a Discord server, a YouTube ad, or a Twitter thread. It happened in person at a Tanner gun show at the Arapahoe County Fairgrounds in Colorado. Back then, the only way to learn about Texacoin was to speak to someone promoting it or an active miner. I'm big into the crypto scene, and I wish I had caught it sooner, if that was even possible. It was a Friday during setup, and I was walking the floor when I noticed a small booth. There was nothing flashy about it, just a simple table with a cloth, a printed image of Donald Trump giving a thumbs up, and a few mining coins laid out, and some printed sheets explaining the project. 2 people were there, if I remember correctly, Brian and Josh, and they were casually talking to passerbys. They explained Texitcoin as a cryptocurrency project tied to mining, community participation, and long-term growth. At that point, mining coins was freely available, fairly different from where things are at today. The physical coins were priced at only $20, and they each came preloaded with roughly $10 worth of Texitcoin. At that time, the coin itself was trading around 45 cents, which meant each coin held roughly 87 to 89 Texitcoin, and I bought 2 of them. Over the course of that Friday, I went back and forth to the booth a few times talking to different miners and learning more. There was genuine excitement, not sales pressure, but enthusiasm. Still, excitement isn't enough to justify getting involved in a new cryptocurrency project. That night, I talked to my best friend Mike about it. His response was blunt: scared money doesn't make money. Either do it or stop talking about it. But I'm not joining until you prove to me it works, and that stuck with me. That very next day, Saturday, I continued talking with the guys at the booth. By the end of the day, I decided to seriously evaluate joining, and if I did, that I would make a YouTube and document my journey as a miner. I went home and I did what most people would do. I researched TEXITcoin. Tried to. What I found wasn't encouraging. Outside of the official materials, nearly everything I could find came from Reddit or small forums. And it was overwhelmingly negative. The common accusations were familiar: scam, honeypot, fake liquidity, impossible withdrawals, a spoofed system. According to the internet, Texit was already dead on arrival. That disconnect between what I experienced in person and what I was reading online was striking, to be honest. Instead of walking away, I decided to approach it differently. Rather than helping the project or trying to recruit people, I chose to document my experience publicly. I started a YouTube channel with a simple goal: show exactly what was happening, good or bad, and let people decide for themselves. Later that night, I filled out the Texacoin form. Within minutes, I received a phone call from Bobby himself, something that would never happen today. We spoke for about 30 minutes. He asked how I found the project, what interested me, and how much I was thinking about investing. At the end of the call, he asked if I was ready to join. I said no, not because I disliked the conversation, but because it still felt unreal. After we hung up, I sat there for a few minutes thinking. Then I called him right back. Almost immediately, I sent over a cryptocurrency payment and was placed into the system. Mining didn't start paying out until the following day, but when it did, I knew it was real. That was the moment my friend Mike decided to join. Day 2 of the project, becoming my first referred miner. There was a few things that made Texacoin stand out, and it wasn't just the mechanics, it was the human element. In the early days, the community was small. It was energetic and personal. People exchanged phone numbers, weekly dinners happened. Miners met in person to discuss strategies, expectations, and growth. Telegram existed, but it wasn't flooded with bots or repetitive noise. There was actual conversation happening. There were events, there were trips. Bobby personally paid for flights and hotels so people could come to Texas, visit the mine, see the equipment firsthand, walk through McKinney, and understand what the future plans were when he said downtown digital dollars, where it's supposed to unfold. This wasn't like buying Ethereum on an exchange and staring at a chart. It felt like I was participating. I met the founder in person multiple times. That changes perceptions. Fairly or not, when you shake someone's hand instead of reading their username, trust dynamics shift a bit. That doesn't make a project good or bad, but it does make it different. What outsiders often misunderstand immediately. Personally, the biggest misunderstanding isn't Texacoin itself, it's cryptocurrency literacy. Less than a small percentage of the global population actively participates in crypto. Texacoin's audience skewed heavily towards people with money, often older, less tech-savvy individuals. Many didn't regularly use smartphones, laptops, or tablets. For them, mining, wallets, private keys, transactions, and exchanges weren't second nature. They were overwhelming. This credited to a steep learning curve. Until someone climbed that curve, everything felt suspicious, confusing, or impossible. That gap between expectation and understanding fueled much of the skepticism seen online. Some critics were fair, some were exaggerated, some came from genuine confusion. Understanding that distinction is critical, and it's one of the main reasons I'm talking about the project. TEXITcoin, a get-rich-quick scheme? That's something that people ask, and it's an honest answer, but it isn't simple. If someone asked me today whether Texacoin is a get-rich-quick project, I would say it's probably the opposite of that now. But in the very beginning, the reality was very different. Early on, Texacoin absolutely behaved like a rapid return opportunity for some people. I personally know individuals who made over $1 million, not just on paper, but in realized gains. Money was withdrawn, assets were purchased, lifestyles changed, people traveled, they celebrated, reinvested, and in some cases burned through money quickly. A few miners I know bought $250,000 to $500,000 homes. Now that's a life-altering experience if you think about it. My own return timeline at the start was extremely short. When I joined, the time to reach ROI was under 15 days, roughly. I knew others who achieved ROI in 3 days. I've even heard firsthand accounts of people reaching ROI in under 15 minutes, typically by immediately making a phone call after confirmation and having wealthy friends or contacts purchase mining shares. And that's an important detail. Who you knew mattered. Access, network, and timing played a massive role in early outcomes. However, that reality no longer exists in the same way. As the project evolved, returns slowed dramatically. What once took days or weeks began taking months and ultimately years. Today, ROI expectations are commonly discussed in terms of 7 to 8 years now, or more, assuming conditions remain stable and not considering the decline in production via sharing based off of the new seats sold. That shift fundamentally changed the nature of the project. So the honest answer is this: TEXITcoin was a get-rich-quick opportunity for some people early on, but it is not one now. It has transitioned into something positioned as a long-term participation model. That distinction matters. Many of the strongest opinions, both positive and negative, come from people who experience very different versions of TEXITcoin, depending on when they may have entered. Understanding that timeline is critical before making any judgment. Old TEXITcoin, exclusivity, the early structure, and its momentum. To understand TEXITcoin, it's critical to understand just how small and exclusive it was in the early phase. When I was joined, I was assigned miner number 325. That matters because I entered the project exactly 4 months after it started, almost to the day. More importantly, I joined on the very day TEXITcoin first became tradable on a physical exchange, DexTrade. Before that moment, there was no open trading, nobody could sell, nobody could test liquidity, everything existed inside the system. From a timeline perspective, that puts my entry at the very beginning of TEXITcoin's public-facing life. Founders, early adopters, and that number question. Officially, TEXITcoin recognizes 100 founder seats. However, based off of what I've observed firsthand through mining trees, participation patterns, and internal structure, I do not believe that there were 100 unique founder participants. My personal assessment is that approximately 23 to 24 individuals acquired those founder positions, each purchasing roughly 13 to 14.5 mining seats. If that interpretation is accurate, it would place me effectively as the 25th unique miner in the project, despite my assigned miner number being higher. That distinction matters because it reframes the early distribution of power, influence, and rewards. For nearly the first year, the community remained extremely small. Telegram chat groups didn't even exceed 750 participants, even at peak activity. This contrasts the sharp curve of a claim of over 50,000 miners, which I believe is significantly inflated due to individuals owning large numbers of mines rather than representing unique participants. Based on the patterns I've seen, a more realistic estimate may be closer to roughly 15,000 unique miners, even though that figure is difficult to verify conclusively. An open door that few walked through. Technically, TEXITcoin was open to anyone from the beginning. Practically almost nobody joined. The reason was simple. Nearly everyone believed it was a scam. At that time, public information was scarce, critical, and often hostile. Reddit threads labeled TEXITcoin a honeypot. Skeptics argued that withdrawals would never work, liquidity was fake, and the system was designed to trap funds indefinitely. That skepticism kept participation low. especially during the earliest and most lucrative phase. As a result, rewards were split among very few people. When daily coin emissions were divided between only a handful of miners, individuals could accumulate tens of thousands of coins per day. Even splitting production between 2 or 3 people still resulted in massive accumulation over time. This dynamic is essential to understanding why early participants experience outcomes that are no longer repeatable. The rules defined, redefined, and redefined again. Were there rules in old Texacoin? Yeah and no. There was a baseline framework outlining what participants could and could not do or should not do. However, enforcement and structure were far from stable. Rules changed frequently, sometimes weekly, sometimes abruptly. Announcements were often made spontaneously, occasionally under unusual circumstances, and then later completely revised or revised again. Payment structures, contest incentives, and restrictions were introduced, modified, or removed with little notice. Decision-making was highly centralized. Rules ultimately reflected the decision of leadership rather than a fixed governance model. While some participants found this flexibility exciting, others found it destabilizing. The lack of consistency would later become one of the most important criticisms, maybe the most common ones, of the project. The exit strategies and early optimism. In the earliest phase, exit strategies were not a primary focus. Most participants openly discussed holding until Texitcoin reached $1, which at the time seemed truly ambitious. It took a considerable period before that milestone was briefly reached, most notably after the project was listed on Bitmart, when the price crossed $1 for the very first time. Behind closed doors, however, large holders did discuss structured selling plans. In private meetings, some early participants described intentions to sell only at certain price levels and in limited quantities, specifically to avoid collapsing the market. At the same time, optimism dominated public discussion. Price projections escalated dramatically over time. First 16, then 80, later 800. Eventually, claims of $2,000 and $3,000 per coin popped up. Even today, despite major price collapses, predictions of rapid returns from Bobby to $16 within a short time frame continues to be made. In hindsight, these projections played a significant role in shaping expectations and disappointment. Why the old Texacoin felt powerful? Old Texacoin combined several rare conditions: extremely low participation, high daily emissions, no immediate sell pressure, strong in-person community, a direct access to leadership, shared optimism and momentum. That combination produced outcomes that were extraordinary and impossible to repeat under later conditions. This is why conversations about Texacoin often feel fractured. People are not arguing about the same project, they are arguing about different eras completely. What about the transition, when momentum broke and the project changed? For many early participants, the moment Texacoin began to change wasn't subtle. It wasn't theoretical. It was felt in real time. For me, momentum began to slow shortly after Texacoin reached the $6 range, which aligns roughly with the period following September and moving into October. That price coincided with a noticeable shift in behavior, incentives, and outcomes across the project. Leading up to that moment, aggressive promotions were underway. Large upgrade packages were pushed, most notably 27-pack purchases and station upgrades to 9-packs. These incentives were paired with high-profile contests, including the Game Over giveaway, which advertised over 30 plus luxury vehicles ranging from sports cars to Ferraris, Lamborghinis, Rolls Royces, Maybachs, and other high-end prizes. The structure of those contests encouraged extreme behavior. Participants, many with MLM backgrounds, were incentivized to spend their own money rapidly, stack positions, and exploit loopholes to improve their odds of winning. The result was a surge of internal spending and recruitment that artificially amplified activity. When the contest ended, the change was immediately noticeable. Spending slowed, new money slowed, price momentum reversed. What had been driven by competition and urgency abruptly collapsed into stagnation. That moment marked the end of Texacoin's upward phase and the beginning of a very different era. The first personal warning signs, while price movement signaled into a macro shift, my first personal indication that something was fundamentally different actually came earlier, around May, just before June. At that time, I was heavily invested in building my team. As a Texit Ranger leading one of the largest TEXITcoin groups in Colorado, the process for paying miner fees was informal but routine. Each week, I would receive an invoice detailing the amount owed. Payment was made by scanning a QR code, which directed funds to be provided to a wallet address of Texacoin's choice. One week, I paid $3,000 for miners. The following day, my Coinbase account was abruptly shut down. I received an email stating that the transactions associated with those wallet addresses had been tagged as a potentially fraudulent account. As a protective measure, Coinbase locked my account entirely. I later learned this same situation affected approximately 10 other individuals in Colorado. Some of them remain locked out to this day and permanently lost access to their funds. When I raised this issue publicly in the Texacoin Telegram group, not on an exchange, not in the media, but internally, I was removed from the chat. I was banned. I was told not to attend upcoming events, including Las Vegas, and was personally insulted. Communication stopped. Then Bobby reached out to my team partner and told everyone just needs a breather and to come out to Vegas and it'll all be good again. Well, Vegas was a mess. I never received funds promised. Bobby ignored me all weekend until we paid him $70K in gold, and then he banned me from the Telegram chat without speaking a word or in person. From that day on, we did not speak a single word to each other for almost a year. That moment marked a clear shift. Raising concerns was no longer tolerated. When the early days truly ended, the emotional end of the early days didn't come from the price alone. It came from structural changes. As growth slowed, commissions remained high, but only for those who continued recruiting aggressively or were scamming the system. A total of around 150 accounts were found to have been playing the system, but what recourse they faced is unknown. Practices that had previously been discouraged or non-existent became normalized. Individuals held multiple positions, structures were stacked, rules were reinterpreted. Eventually, commission eligibility was changed entirely. Participants could no longer earn commissions unless they recruited additional individuals, a condition that had not originally existed. This marked a philosophical shift from participation-based rewards to recruitment-dependent earnings. For many early participants, this changes fundamentally altered the nature of the project. If it wasn't close to an MLM, it sure as heck was now. Making miners recruit or pay for 3 mining spots every 90 days to keep your ability to earn money is the product itself, or so it could seem that way. The final blow came when leadership access disappeared. Phone calls stopped being returned. Messages went unread. Long-standing relationships dissolved overnight. After my removal from communication channels, other participants stopped contacting me, not out of disagreement, but out of fear. Association itself became a giant risk. That was the moment it became clear old Texacoin was over. From the community to control. Old Texacoin thrived on openness, access, and shared excitement. New Texacoin operated through restriction, silence, and enforcement. This transition explains much of the tension that exists today. Participants aren't simply disappointed by price action, they are reacting to a loss of trust, transparency, and agency. People didn't just lose money, they lost their voice. Once Bobby could be called, texted, or even be found chatting on Telegram, he's since changed his numbers. If you message him, he will block you. Call him, you get banned. He won't spend any time talking to anyone about anything that's Texacoin related. That's his rules. No talking about TXC at events. Now, people can't talk to Bobby. They just see him on Zoom, and even then lately, he bans anyone who doesn't agree with him, so that's kind of scary. One of the biggest misconceptions about critics of Texacoin, especially those who speak openly, is that there's an assumption that they want the project to fail. This could be further from the truth in my case. I believe in Texacoin deeply, not symbolically, not casually, permanently. I have a Texacoin tattoo on my body. So does my friend Mike. And as far as I know, we are the only two people who do. And we did it long before anyone thought it was fashionable or safe to do so. Notably, the founder himself doesn't even have one. As a matter of fact, he paid us to do it, which wasn't required, but appreciated. You don't permanently mark your body for something you want to see collapse. I want Texacoin to succeed. I want it to become what it could have been. I want the people still involved, many of whom I respect, to win. But belief alone does not make a system work. When belief meets reality, the new Texacoin is not failing because people have stopped believing. It is struggling because structural trust has eroded. Over time, patterns emerged that were difficult to ignore. Market behavior appeared inconsistent with organic demand. Price floors were maintained, then suddenly abandoned. Public optimism continued while underlying confidence quickly weakened. From the outside, everything looked controlled. From the inside, it felt unstable. There were repeated moments where leadership narratives shifted week to week. One meeting would downplay an issue, the next would acknowledge a more serious problem. Explanations changed, timelines moved, certainty dissolved. To be clear, I'm not asserting criminal behavior. I am describing perception, patterns, and the participation, interpretation. That distinction matters. What many participants believe, rightfully or wrongly, was that price action depended less on market adoption and more on discretionary intervention. When that intervention stopped, demand exposed itself. At that moment, a harsh realization sat in. Outside the mining ecosystem, there was little organic buying pressure. That brings us to the path problem. One of the most damaging elements, new Texacoin, was not the price decline, it was the expectation management. Repeated references to predetermined price paths created exploitable behavior. Experienced crypto participants noticed patterns. Some adopted accordingly. Buy low, wait for public reinforcement, sell into the strength, and then repeat. That behavior doesn't require malice, it only requires predictability. And over time, it created a feedback loop where trust diminished further. The volatility increased, and long-term holders felt punished for their loyalty. When you're talking about information control and silence, that's a whole nother defining feature of the new Texacoin. That's the information highway. Most current participants have no real understanding of how small the project once was, how quickly ROI was achieved early, how rules evolved, how enforcement changed, how much direction leadership actually retained. This is not because they are incapable of understanding, but because they were never told. Only early adopters and founders truly know the difference between the project and how it used to be. Many of them stay silent, not out of agreement, but out of fear. Speaking openly has consequences. Accesses can be revoked, earnings can disappear, association itself becomes risky. That silence creates a false sense of continuity. New participants believe they are joining the same system others once did, and they are not. One honest sentence about new Texacoin, well, if I had to describe new Texacoin in one honest sentence, it would be this. New Texacoin is hard work. There is no shortcut anymore. You must convince people. You must rebuild their trust. You must explain a history you're not allowed to fully discuss. You must recruit consistently just to remain viable. You must manage skepticism, fatigue, and disbelief. This is no longer passive participation. It has become labor. Some may choose to simply hold and hope, believing that time alone could eventually create value, much like Bitcoin did for early holders. That outcome is possible, but it's highly uncertain. What is certain is that anyone expecting fast returns, easy ROI, or momentum-driven gains will be greatly disappointed. And who carries the risk now? Perhaps the most painful realization for many miners is exactly this. Those at the top are insulated. Assets have been acquired, compensation is stable, infrastructure exists, downside risk is asymmetric, borne primarily by participants still grinding at the base. That does not mean leadership wants failure. It does mean incentives are no longer aligned the way they once were. And misaligned incentives are dangerous in any system. What comes next, you ask? Well, the new Texacoin is not doomed, but it cannot succeed unchanged. Rebuilding is going to require multiple things: transparency, stable rules, honest communication, acknowledgement of the past, and alignment between leadership and its participants. Without those, effort alone is not going to be enough. Hard work matters, truly does, but direction matters more. Can Texitcoin be fixed? What about accountability, enforcement, and the path forward? Well, criticism without solution is noise. And this exists for one reason: to explain what would actually rebuild trust, not hypothetically, but concretely. For me, trust would not be restored through optimism, promotion, or price predictions. It would be restored through accountability and enforcement. Something we could all use a little bit from time to time. And that brings us to the accountability gap. One of the most frequently raised concerns within the Texacoin community involves persistent sell pressure, originating from a small number of wallets. Leadership has publicly acknowledged that certain wallets have been distributing unusually large amounts of Texacoin daily, sometimes thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of tokens, over extended periods of time. Participants have repeatedly been told that these issues are being investigated, that responsible parties are being identified, and that corrective action is forthcoming. To date, no transparent resolution has been presented. This is where trust starts to break down. Texacoin controls its internal payout system. It issues rewards daily. It knows which wallets receive them. That means identities, histories, and patterns are knowable internally, even if they are not public. When prolonged abuse is acknowledged but not addressed, participants draw their own conclusions. Whether those conclusions are correct or not, silence becomes corrosive. Trust cannot survive indefinite investigation without outcomes. The rule enforcement and the selective application of who it applies to. Another major concern involves uneven rule enforcement. Over time, it has become extremely apparent that multiple participants were operating multiple account centers or identities, sometimes openly discussed amongst peers. These practices undermine system integrity and distort incentives, especially when rewards or contests are involved. In theory, such behavior violates standard rules. In practice, enforcement appeared inconsistent. When rules apply only to some participants and not others, the system stops being merit-based and becomes relationship-based. That perception alone is enough to fracture a community, even if leadership believes exemptions are justified. A functional system requires one rule set, one enforcement standard, no protected statuses. Without that, participation feels exploitive rather than cooperative. And nobody likes that. Nobody likes to be exploited. Culture matters more than the code. Perhaps the most damaging shift in new Texacoin has been cultural. Early on, leadership explicitly encouraged accountability. Participants were told directly to raise concerns, challenge decisions, and speak openly if something felt wrong. That culture no longer exists. Today, asking difficult questions can result in removal from communication channels, loss of affiliate statuses, or complete exclusion from the ecosystem. Whether intentional or not, this creates an environment where silence is safer than honesty. That is not how trust-based systems survive. Strong projects do not fear criticism, they absorb it, they adapt, they improve, they overcome. What TEXITcoin still does well, and there's quite a bit of it, but despite everything outlined in what I've been talking about so far, it would be dishonest to say TEXITcoin has no strengths. Promotion has always been one of them. Few projects have matched TEXITcoin's visibility efforts. Billboards, events, sponsorships, and branding incentives created awareness far beyond what most small crypto projects achieve. The challenge now is sustainability. As external advertising slows and budgets tighten, promotion alone will no longer carry the project. Awareness without trust does not convert into long-term participation. What TEXITcoin needs more than participation is reconciliation. That would bring us to the work that actually needs to be done. If TEXITcoin is to succeed going forward, several things must happen. Transparent acknowledgement of past issues, consistent enforcement of rules, clear separation between leadership, friends, and participants, open communication without retaliation, and a restoration of the community trust. A return to the people, not just the numbers. Rebuilding a community is harder than building hype, but it's the only path forward. The cost of ignoring this, when incentives are misaligned, trust erodes. When trust erodes, only the most insulated participants remain safe. When that happens, everyone else carries the risk. TEXITcoin does not need blind loyalty. It needs earned confidence. Hard work alone will not fix this. Honesty and the leadership might. Who TEXITcoin is and is not for. TEXITcoin is not a project that can be reduced to a simple yes or no recommendation. It's a highly situational, Whether it makes sense depends less on ideology and more on temperament, expectations, and basic practicality. Who Texacoin is probably not for? Well, Texacoin is probably not suited well for people who are fundamentally anti-technology. Participation requires, at a minimum, a smartphone, a tablet, or even a computer. You need to have a reliable internet access, an active email address, a mailing address, a willingness to log into systems, follow instructions, and adapt. If someone is unwilling to or unable to engage with modern technology or fundamentally distrusts it, they will struggle. This is especially relevant for some older participants who no longer need technology in daily life. If you don't use an email, don't carry a smartphone, or don't want to learn new systems, and don't have someone that's reliably able to help you, TEXITcoin will feel overwhelming and frustrating. That doesn't make anyone foolish. It simply means the project isn't designed for that demographic. Who might still benefit today? Despite everything outlined in earlier talks, participation can still produce value. Even now, miners continue to receive Texacoin daily. While the amount distributed has decreased and the market value has declined significantly, distribution has remained consistent. Coins are still paid out regardless of sentiment, controversy, or internal policies. And that's what matters. While early participants experience rapid ROI, today's value proposition is different. It is slower, quieter, and far more uncertain. But that's not non-existent. Participants who already own mining seats, are comfortable holding long-term, or do not rely on commissions, they can tolerate volatility. They may still simply, by continuing to mine and accumulate Texacoins, do phenomenal. The value of those coins may never recover to prior highs, or they may one day exceed them. Both outcomes are possible. That uncertainty is now a defining characteristic of the new Texacoin. When you look at mining versus recruiting, one of the most important distinctions for the new participants is this: you do not have to recruit to mine. Recruiting has become difficult. Commission structure that once produced consistent weekly incomes are now far harder to sustain. For many people, recruiting is stressful, uncomfortable, and unrealistic. Mining, by contrast, continues passively. For individuals who prefer a low engagement approach, mine, collect, hold. Texitcoin still makes sense, provided they understand the risks and the timelines. Something that I tell a lot of my close friends when they ask me whether they should get involved, my answer is honest and conditional. If they have the discretionary money that can afford to be locked up without stress, and they are curious, I tell them it's reasonable to consider mining. I don't promise returns, I don't guarantee outcomes, I don't push recruiting. I explain that there's a risk, there's an uncertainty, there is still daily distribution, and there is still an upside potential. And I can make one thing very clear: nobody knows what's going to happen next, except for Bobby. Texacoin is often compared to Bitcoin, although I want to make it clear I think that they are two completely separate worlds. The only thing Bitcoin and Texacoin have in common is that they are cryptocurrencies. That comparison is imperfect, but the core idea resonates. Early Bitcoin adopters held something most people dismissed. Years later, it changed lives. That doesn't mean Texacoin will follow the same path. It means the possibility, however, slim or distant, does still exist. And that's part of the reason why I'm still here. I still believe in Texacoin. I still receive coins every day. I have paid for mining seats for others. I continue to support participation where it makes sense. Belief does not require blindness. Hope does not require silence. Texitcoin's future is unresolved. It may rebuild, it may stagnate, it may surprise everyone. For now, it remains a project defined by potential, risk, and a lot of patience. My final thoughts. What has Texacoin taught me? If I stripped away the price charts, some of the drama, the arguments, a lot of the noise, Texacoin taught me far more about people than it ever did about cryptocurrency. Definitely taught me about myself. It taught me about systems, and more than anything, it taught me about trust. One of the hardest lessons I've learned is that money changes people. Not always immediately and not always obviously, but almost inevitably. I watched friendships shift the moment money entered the room. People who once talked about generosity, community, and doing good slowly became more self-focused. The language changed, the priorities changed. What mattered wasn't helping others anymore. It was an image, a status, and the appearances. For the most part, I've chose a different path. While I've made money, I used a lot of it to help other people. I took friends out to dinner, paid for groceries, bought gifts. I've helped a ton of people out with rent. I tried to make life easier for people around me while still enjoying some of the freedoms that came with success. What surprised me wasn't that some people said no when asked for help. It was that how often people with far more money than I had access to gave nothing at all. No generosity, no gratitude, just accumulation. That was disappointing. Not because I expected something back, but because I believe money could be used to make life better for more than just one person. That brings in the illusion of teamwork. Texitcoin taught me that many people love the idea of a team until money is involved. I saw people take credit that wasn't theirs. I saw trust broken over commissions. I saw shortcuts taken when backs were turned. People talked about unity while acting purely in self-interest. And when consequences appeared, silence followed. That doesn't mean everybody is bad. There are definitely good people, genuinely good people. They stayed true to themselves, but they are fewer than I expected and far quieter than the ones chasing attention. Trust, contracts, and reality. Another hard lesson, get everything in writing. Friendship is not a contract. Verbal promises are not protection. Good intentions do not survive pressure. People you've known for years can surprise you, not always in good ways. I learned to separate kindness from being naive and optimism from protection. It doesn't mean becoming cold, it means becoming clear. The cost of speaking honestly. One of the most painful outcomes of this journey is how many people I lost. They didn't die. I didn't lose them through arguments or through fear, but over time, people stopped calling, stopped texting, stopped associating publicly, not because they disagreed with me, but because they were afraid. Afraid of losing access, afraid of retaliation, afraid of consequences for honesty. That kind of environment changes people. It isolates those who speak and rewards those who stay quiet. I chose not to stay quiet. That choice cost me friendships, opportunities, and comfort. But it preserved something more important, my integrity. What's worse is that the founder himself asked me to refrain from talking to a handful of friends I had developed because he thought they were annoying or stupid, forcing me to end relationships with people I really valued. When you look at paper losses and real experiences, that's where things can be crazy. On paper, I'm down hundreds of thousands of dollars from peak value. but life is not lived on spreadsheets. Through this project, I was able to experience new things I otherwise wouldn't have. I got to take some cool trips, enjoy time, and invest in myself. I've got to build this amazing YouTube channel for everybody, and I've helped others make their lives better. Those things have really mattered to me. Money comes, money goes, but the lessons last. Nice guys and that finish line. There's a saying that nice guys finish last. Sometimes it feels true. Others made way more money than I did. Others won bigger prizes. Others stayed quiet and kept earning. But they didn't tell the story. They didn't explain the risks. They didn't help people understand anything. They don't have a YouTube, not screaming to buy a mining seat now before the week closes. They took and they moved on. I chose to document, to explain, and help people make informed decisions rather than emotional ones. I didn't lose myself in the process. I actually gained and learned more. And why I still believe in Texacoin, despite everything I've had to experience or have seen, I still believe. Not blindly, not naively, but honestly. I believe systems can be fixed. I believe people can learn. I believe transparency matters. I believe communities can be rebuilt. And if the trust is acknowledged, we're in good hands. And I believe that telling the full story, not just the profitable parts, is the only way forward. Texacoin didn't just give me coins. It gave me perspective. It showed me who I am when things go right and when they fall apart. It showed me who others are when money enters the situation. Most importantly, it reminded me that doing the right thing doesn't always pay the most, but it lets you sleep at night. And that, in the end, is probably worth more than any chart. Till next time, see you guys on the moon.